Time now for Scoop, our weekly conversation on international media and the political and economic headwinds confronting the industry. We look at who shapes the narrative, explore journalistic ethics, and ask the reporters the difficult questions. With trust in the press at a nadir, it's a critical eye on a critical profession. Well, there's concern at U.S. universities and among student journalists that their speech, protected by law, is being weaponized against them by the U.S. government. Here's ABC News.
Some students even detained, including a Tufts Fulbright scholar. Federal agents claiming her visa was revoked and the DOJ accusing her of supporting Hamas after co-authoring a pro-Palestinian op-ed for her student newspaper. And Mahmoud Khalil also detained after his green card was revoked. The Columbia University graduate, a prominent pro-Palestinian protester on campus. Attorneys for both have said their detentions are unlawful and are calling for their release.
Now, Tufts University is in the state of Massachusetts. MSNBC sought reaction from one of the state's congressional representatives. Take a listen.
This young woman has been dedicating her career to helping children who are dealing with mental health challenges. She wrote an op-ed for her student newspaper that I disagree with about Israel. And you know what, Alex? I have come on this show and I have made my opposing viewpoint on Israel well known. That's how America works. How America does not work is bullying young women with masked officers because of a political viewpoint. That's not who we are.
As for Columbia University, if you recall, the university was at the center of the anti-war protests that rocked the country last year. And just last month, the university caved to a series of changes demanded by the Trump administration as a precondition for restoring $400 million in federal funding. Alex Wagner went to Columbia's campus to find out how students, journalists, were reacting.
Are people freaking out on staff?
Yeah, absolutely. Literally 10 minutes ago, I got an email from one of our former writers, an alumni, not a current writer.
Oh, wow.
Who wanted to have all of our articles taken offline. I've gotten at least 5 of these emails in the past week.
And is it about Gaza or is it just about political dissent generally?
It's definitely about political dissent generally. The stress is unreal. And the self-censorship, to say it's a chilling effect would be an understatement. It's a freezing effect.
Then this week, a rare alert was issued to student news outlets. In light of the risks, it urged student media to review their takedown and anonymity policies, to be transparent about anonymous bylines and sourcing, and to educate staff on risks. That alert signed by a coalition of 6 national student media organizations. The story made headlines, but in my opinion, not enough. Anvee Bhutani wrote about it for The Guardian, and she joins us on the line from New York City. Hello to you, Anvee. I want to begin, first of all, with that alert. It shocked me when I saw it. It said, quote, ethical journalism demands that we minimize harm. We have issued this alert because our organizations believe student media may fail that obligation if they continue to adhere to the traditional guidelines in light of recent development. So, Anvee, can you spell it out for us? How are traditional guidelines potentially going to cause harm?
Yeah, I mean, thanks so much for having me. I think with traditional guidelines at the minute, what we're seeing is, while newspapers, student newspapers in particular, generally prefer not to have, their sources be anonymous, generally prefer to have the byline of the article really spell out who's written the piece, who's worked on the piece. That's not really possible at the minute. I mean, students are living in real fear, especially since that Tufts student was detained for her op-ed. It's raised questions around, what's permitted and acceptable to publish and what you're able to say. And so as a result, student newspapers are having to really think about critically, who authors their articles and who they use as quotes in the articles even, to make sure that they are not harming any of their international students on campus and any of their peers.
And this is so ironic because, of course, at universities, we're supposed to be thinking critically and journalism is supposed to be speaking truth to power. And now some people having to rein in both of those elements.
No, definitely. I mean, it's the antithesis of everything we are taught and practice here in America, which is, free speech, freedom of the press. And yeah, student journalists are doing the best that they can. But, when the very speech itself is criminalized, that creates serious challenges. I mean, I personally know student journalists who opted not to have their bylines on articles and instead report under an anonymous byline because they're international students here in this country, and genuinely worried about their safety and security. And so it's really hard challenges that people are grappling with around, being fundamentally opposed to this, but not even being able to speak out.
Anvee, you alluded to it earlier, anonymous bylines and sources. Normally, that would detract from a newsroom's credibility. Cynical readers might think that the stories themselves are fabricated or being made up. Is that a risk here for these student-led publications?
Yeah, definitely. So I've spoken to student editors across the country, and a lot of them described that they have really hard jobs at the minute because on one hand, they view their student newspapers as a historical record, and altering that record becomes really damaging when they're getting requests from students who wrote for them in the past, people they interviewed in the past. Sometimes even alumni are reaching out to have their names removed from these articles. It creates a real ethical challenge around what's permissible to delete from that record. And for many editors, it's not a request that they've ever gotten in the past. And so they've been having serious discussions with their teams, with their board around how they handle this. Because, once you start deleting a few things from the record, the integrity of that record is called into question. But nonetheless, when the fear is so real and so permissible, when someone's able to be picked up off the street in broad daylight, I think these student editors have recognized that the safety of their peers, the safety of their fellow reporters is far more important than, maintaining the historical record. And that's why some of these editors have made the tough and, unprecedented decision to remove those names from bylines and from articles themselves.
Yeah, and all of this because we're in something of a legal gray area. The U.S. State Department has the right to revoke visas, but must provide legitimate reasons as to why it's doing so. Legal experts on Al Jazeera's Listening Post were divided as to how the power was being applied. Take a listen.
Blanket statements that are made that somehow the same rights and privileges of citizens are the same for foreign nationals. They are not.
Well, the Bill of Rights doesn't use the word citizen. It talks about the rights of the people. The First Amendment says the rights of the people shall be protected. Think about the logical implications of the argument that suddenly 30 million people don't have any rights whatsoever under the Bill of Rights, don't have free speech rights. The right to due process would essentially be the establishment of a dictatorship.
Anvee, the students you spoke to, do they understand what they can say or do or cannot say or do? Are they compliant? Are they defiant?
I mean, the students I spoke to did understand what they were able to do under the law, as did many attorneys. And now both the students and attorneys are finding out that it's actually really hard to know where that line is being drawn in the sand, because technically they should be allowed to say what they've said, and they should be allowed to continue to do that. But on a practical level, the consequences are so real, with Mahmoud Khalil being picked up, with Ramesa Ozturk from Tufts being picked up. And so now it's unclear to students what is allowed and isn't. And as a result, I've seen with the students I've spoken to a high level of self-censorship. Some of them are just opting not to report or not to speak even. I mean, international students across the country, especially those who are loud and outspoken, are choosing to forego that freedom of speech that we all hold so dearly. And in fact, I've spoken to recently even students who are putting themselves under house arrest and choosing to not only not speak, but also be indoors because they're really scared that they might be detained and stopped in the street and just picked up off the street. So it's a really tough place for international students to be at the minute, and international people in this country in general.
Right, and we should say you are a student at Columbia University. Anvee, do students there feel like the university has their back if the administration does come looking for them perhaps to revoke visas? Do they think Columbia University will have their back?
Absolutely not. I think at Columbia, there's a real fear not only of the Trump administration, but also that when push comes to shove, that Columbia University won't stand by them. And that's because of Columbia's history of kind of not standing by its students. Last spring, when there were protests on campus, the Columbia administration, at the request of the trustees, called in the New York Police Department, and over 100 students were arrested just in one night. But beyond that, when Mahmoud Khalil, for instance, was detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the university still has yet to put out a statement with Mahmoud Khalil's name, and they haven't issued a statement in support of Mahmoud Khalil. That's in direct contrast to the Tufts University student, where Tufts University was very clear and has put out a statement in support of their student. And since then, Tufts have been very vocal, speaking on the news, lobbying the government to try to get their student back. We just haven't seen that same level of commitment at Columbia. And so, international students are scared that when and if things go wrong, which, we've had 3 students from campus detained now. We've had, ICE show up to campus many more times. Students are scared that the university won't stand by their side. And so they've had to turn to alternate, means of support or resources.
Yeah, and Anvee, I just want to say to our viewers, you are a U.S. citizen. That's why you can speak to us freely, so openly today. I did contact other students from Columbia University who could not talk because either they were international or because certain powers that be were unsure about the pressures, the political pressures, and they didn't want to put students at risk. Anvee, it's very rare that journalists themselves are the story. You've covered a number of these issues we've been talking about, whether it's the protests, the arrests, the visas. How has this informed you as a reporter?
Yeah, I mean, it's really strange. I'm a student at the Columbia Journalism School, and we always get taught, it's about the people you report on. It's not about yourself. But here, it is about my peers and colleagues. At the journalism school, even, fellow reporters who I'm around every day are really deciding whether or not journalism is a viable career to pursue in the United States as a non-citizen, and whether they will be able to report freely. And so, when freedom of speech is at stake, when freedom of the press is at stake, then we're all implicated in that story. And I think that's been one of the most devastating things to see for me personally, is to see the very nature of the work that I do come under attack. But I think I'm so glad that I'm able to speak as a U.S. citizen. And, we'll continue to do the work, we'll continue to report, and hopefully, this country will kind of see sense around this issue.
Yeah, I don't want to get ahead of you in terms of what your career prospects are. You've already been published by a number of publications, but do you think you'll stay stateside, or are you concerned enough that it might take you abroad?
I mean, fingers crossed, things are okay for me as an American. But when everything is in such limbo, it's hard to know. And so I think it'll be a matter of, playing things by ear and really seeing how things go under the Trump administration. And, even when real newspapers like, big ones like the AP are being kept out of the White House by the Trump administration, they recently had their access restored, but for a while they weren't able to report on the Trump administration. It seriously calls into question, what journalists are and aren't able to do, and that's not something that we've seen before under other presidential administrations. So it does make it really tough to be a journalist in this country, and yeah, we'll have to see where things go.
Anvee, thank you so much for your time. Anvee Bhutani joining us from New York City. Thank you. And that brings us to our quote of the week, and it does come from the New York Times editorial board, which wrote a piece called A Playbook for Standing Up to President Trump. Now, in it, they said, quote, the most likely path to American autocracy depends on not only a power-hungry president, but also the voluntary capitulation of a cowed civil society. It depends on the mistaken belief that a president is invincible. Anybody who has dealt with a schoolyard bully should recognize this principle. The illusion of invincibility is often his greatest asset. That's it for this edition of Scoop. Thank you for watching. Please stay tuned to France 24.